All right, we are there, or here, as the case may be. So, I'm only going to speak briefly because I am not the MC tonight. So, I'm only going to say a couple of quick words, and then I'll bring on a man who needs no introduction, but I'll give him a brief introduction. So, I would like to thank everybody who worked so hard on this book. A lot of people, well, let's just put it this way, it took a few more hours than we originally anticipated because there wasn't a manuscript. So once we crossed that particular Rubicon, then it just took like a few more hours than, you know, a normal book. I think Les said the problem with these darn collected is it's like a whole season in one book, so you end up doing 2 seasons. But so I want to thank all the staff members, all the freelancers, everybody. There was a lot of people who worked really hard on the book. I want to thank them all, and I want to thank the editor of the book, Susan Holbrook, who kindly has flown out from Leamington, Ontario, to join us tonight. So I want to really thank her. I want to thank Daphne for letting us publish this magnificent volume, and I want to thank you all very much for coming out on November 30th, which I realize basically you are into the Christmas season and you're competing with all kinds of stuff. So thank you so much for coming. And on that note, I will introduce Colin Brown, who's our MC tonight, and Talon poet. And normally I might go on about Colin a bit, but in this particular crowd, I think he is a man who needs no introduction.
By the way, for those of you who may not know, that was Kevin Williams, the publisher of Talonbooks. And they all did, because I visited the office over the last year, they've all worked really hard. I think we should really champion Talonbooks for what they've achieved with this book and with so many books of poetry. So I'd like to really salute you. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that we gather this evening on the traditional unceded territories of Coast Salish people, the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, to use their anglicized names and to thank our hosts and to reflect on the responsibilities embedded in an acknowledgement like this. And I have here, I'd also like to thank Talonbooks, but we've done that, so that's very good. But I wanted to just acknowledge where we stand at the moment and what that means. And I think that question and those responsibilities are addressed by Daphne throughout this book from a very early time in a serious and important way. When I first started coming to Vancouver to go to university in the late 70s, I didn't really know anybody, and then eventually moved here. I went to SFU, and it was the sort of end of the faux wild man period of Vancouver poetry. And it was the time when you had to put on the back of your book that you had stretched fences and sat in a fire tower for a couple of philosophical summers. Maybe you set chokers for a year, spend a time on a seiner, that kind of thing. You'll gather these are all male activities. And most of the poets that I met were male. And there was a lot of loud activity in the parties that I was invited to, a few bits of kicking and fighting and drinking and all sorts of activities like that. And through all of that, I started trying to find the poetry of this place. And so before I would catch the bus, I became one of those lonesome figures in MacLeod's books, looking through the shelves. And I found this book here. And really, this has been my Baedeker for Vancouver. This was my guide. When I came in, I was looking for something that would tell me where I was. This is Vancouver Poems, the first edition, published by Coach House Press in 1972. And, you know, in 1924, Blaise Cendrars, the French poet, published a poem called Vancouver. And it was in a little book called Codex Documentaire. So he had this concept that he would write these sort of poems around traveling, his own kind of version of an Utaniki, he didn't call it that. And each poem would be like a snapshot. And so that poem for many, many years ended up in anthologies about Vancouver, and everybody said, "Oh, Blaise Cendrars was here. Wasn't that wonderful? He was here. He wrote this poem about the fog and the harbor and all of this business." Well, in fact, he wasn't ever here. And but it shows you that you can fool most of the people most of the time, and that it's enough. I mean, fiction writers know this. But I just wanted to say that Blaise Cendrars could never write a book like this. Deep, sensual, intimate, penetrating, documentary poem like this. And I've always thought of it as a single poem in a way, although it's called Vancouver Poems. So with this, I would just like to salute Daphne, and we're going to be speaking with her this evening. She's going to read at the end of the readings. But I'm going to ask the editor of this, get him while you can, astonishing book, Intertidal, Susan Holbrook, if she'll come up and maybe talk a bit about the editing and also read from the book. So, Susan.
Thank you. It's so exciting to be here tonight. I first encountered Daphne's work when I was doing my undergraduate degree at University of Victoria. It was in the late 80s. And I was working on an honors project on the Canadian documentary poem. So I was working on Ondaatje's collected works of Billy the Kid and Margaret Atwood's journals of Susanna Moodie. And at one point, my supervisor, who was Stephen Scobie, handed me Steveston and said, "Take a look at this." And I started reading a few poems, and then I know that the look that I gave him is exactly the look that my students give me sometimes when I hand them Gertrude Stein, for example. And the look means something between, "What?" and "This is incredible, and please don't make me write an exam about this." And I handed it back to him, and I didn't write about it for my honors thesis. But as with Stein, what happens to my students and happened to me was that Daphne's poetry just kept working away at my brain. And then 2 years later, I found myself writing a master's thesis on the Steveston project. So those searching, sounding, resounding prose poetry lines had hooked me. And because of that unique formal energy and the way that it tracks the current of Marlatt's radical attunement to the world and to language, I have been reading and writing about and teaching those works ever since. So when Kevin Williams wrote me to invite me to edit Daphne's collected 600 pages of it, my reaction was, "What?" And also, of course. And part of the gift of that was that I got to work with Talonbooks, and also, in particular, this series, because I had been admiring and reading Scree, Fredwau's collected, and also kind of exhibiting it in my office for anybody who wanted to look at it, and also coveting Phyllis Webb's collected, and Kevin promptly sent that to me. It was July of 2016. I flew here, and Daphne and I began our conversations about the book. And you would think that compiling a collected poems would be fairly straightforward. You collect the poems. But Daphne has so many beautiful books, and we had to limit ourselves to 600 pages. So in fact, partway through, it became clear this would be a volume 1. It would be the earlier collected poems. And then there was the issue of what counts as poems, because a lot of Daphne's work lies on this spectrum between poetry and prose. So what makes the cut there? And then there was the issue of revisions. So there are many versions of a given poem, many published versions. So which would we choose? And then Daphne is also a generous collaborator, so there are lots of works that were not written by her solely. And could they make it in to the book? These editorial so-called problems were also the very features that distinguish and energize Daphne's work. So we're trying to find a way to celebrate them, and also at the same time we were using them as thresholds of inclusion and exclusion. There's a New Yorker comic strip that I kept thinking of while I was working on this. It's at my parents' cottage in Northern Ontario, and it's tacked on the inside of the outhouse, so I've seen it a lot. And the comic strip has like a mother cat, and she's carrying a kitten across a path, and she deposits it, and then she goes back to get the second kitten. Meanwhile, the first kitten follows behind her. She takes the second kitten, deposits it, turns, and the first kitten's already over here, and the second kitten follows her. Then she picks up the third kitten and comes over here. And by the time she turns, the first kitten is already back at the beginning, and the second and the third are following her, and she has to pick up the first kitten. So it's kind of like that. We're working on the poem. So there was the back and forth of our discussions of what we kept changing our mind about what we were going to include and what we were going to have to exclude. And then there was an issue of technology, because Daphne and I, neither of us are technological wizards. And so we found that if you're working with a scan of a book, you could spend days like fixing the indents and the stanza breaks and the italics and the B's that were supposed to be LOs. And then you send them back through the ether across the country, and by the time they arrive, all the vowels are wingdings or something. So there was that. It was like the online arena of the editorial process, or like our lack of savvy in that online arena, meant there was a lot of extra kitten carrying back and forth. And I want to thank Chloe Filson, who is so patient with us. Very, very, very patient with us. There even was the case that her emails to me were mysteriously blocked by the firewall at the University of Windsor. And it was only her. This was like something reserved for her. She told me today it could be the umlaut on Chloe, or we're not really sure. And then there was Daphne's never-ending revisionary process. Tonight is a roast, right? Isn't it? So I'm just, even for example, I'm looking at this poem that I chose to read tonight, and it's a proof page, so it has notes on it, and I see that I've drawn a line in the middle of the text, and I've written line break, as in original book, but then I've also scribbled above that stet, which means that I talked on the phone with Daphne, and she said, "Oh no, I've changed that now." So although the collected does honor the history of Daphne's practice. So for example, you'll see in those poems from the late 60s and early 70s that signature orthography that's so interesting. But you'll also notice, if you're familiar with her work, that there are revisions, there are changes. So what the book offers you is the latest published incarnation for some of these poems, which are always evolving. And will continue to evolve. This is not the last word. So if you love definitive editions, you might find this book unsettling. And I think that is a very good thing, that you feel unsettled, and that any book that doesn't embody movement is not a Daphne Marlatt book. There's a Marianne Moore poem that I was just teaching this week. It's called An Egyptian Pulled Glass Bottle in the Shape of a Fish. And in there, Marianne Moore captures the impossible beauty of this object and its making, and this object and the natural, the animal that it embodies, by saying that it is, quote, a wave held up for us to see. And I feel like this collected on your bookshelf will be like that. So like all the flux and the rush and the movement of a wave is there. And it will continue to roll, but at the same time, like the body of the book is is a way that it is held up for us to see. Before I read a poem, I just want to thank again everyone at Talon for the opportunity to be invited to collaborate on this. It's a really incredible experience, and honestly, it was a pleasure to do all that back and forthing, because these poems yield more every time you read them. And I want to thank Daphne for her gorgeous books, all replete with her uncommon attention to the world and to language, with her empathetic reach, with her philosophical and spiritual expansiveness, and with her unique liquid music that is her encounter with language. And for being so lovely and fun and inspiring to work with. I knew Daphne before we started working on this, but now we are friends. And it could have gone the other way. Sometimes when you work on projects with people, it goes the opposite way. I'm going to read a very short poem, and it's from a lost book, which was a series written mostly in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was published in This Tremor Love Is in 2001. And I chose it in part because, as I say, like as a scholar and a reader, I've been really fascinated with Daphne's long lines, her long poetic prose lines. But working on the collected, I was reminded and shown how magical her short line poems are too. So I wanted to read one of those. And I also like it because in a way it's a statement of poetics in miniature. It's called Meant, and it's got a dedication for Roy in La Pouche. If intent would give up, let words utter what they offer, broken in their rush on, us two given to apart, we'd listen to them break forever. Pebbles crash and pull are difficult particulars, suspended each, noun, awash, a wave collapsed upon, the coast of our astonishments. Thank you.
I'm a little embarrassed because I decided I was talking too long and I forgot to introduce you to Susan as a poet. So I just wanted to tell you her titles. And I think her 2016 book has the best title of 2016, was nominated for a Governor General's Award and a Trillium Award for Poetry in Ontario. Throaty Wipes. 2009, Joy is So Exhausting, also nominated for a Trillium Award. And Misled came out in 1999, was shortlisted for the Pat Lowther Award and the Stephen G. Stephenson Award. And she's also co-edited a collection of the letters of Gertrude Stein and Virgil Thompson, which is a pretty terrific collection if you're interested in Stein or Thompson, or both, which they're anyway, kind of amazing. And she's written a book also, which just came out a couple of years ago, called How to Read and Write About Poetry. And indeed, she teaches at the University of Windsor. So thanks so much, Susan, for coming all this way and for doing the book. Fantastic. Our next reader is Roy Miki. And Roy and Daphne have known each other for many, many years. And I have a list of Roy's books here. It goes for quite a while. But I just want to remind you of some titles. Random Access File in 1994, Poetry Surrender in 2001. Roy won the Governor General's Award that year for poetry in English. There in 2006. He was the co-editor with Smaro Cambarelli of Trans-Can Lit, Resituating the Study of Canadian Literature, 2007, and also another collection of essays, his own essays, Influx, Transnational Shifts in Asian Canadian Writing in 2011. 2014, you may be aware of his book Mannequin Rising, and with Slavia Miki in 2014, he published Dolphin SOS. And forthcoming is Flow, new and collected poems edited by Michael Barnholden from Talonbooks. And we look forward to that as, I think, part of the series, is it, Kevin? We'll see. So that'll be the next one. He also was the editor of Pacific Windows, the collected poems of Roy K. Kiyuka, and a record of writing and annotated and illustrated bibliography of George Bowring in 1991. It's got to fill an entire shelf with the subsequent bibliographies of George, I think. George, by the way, said they're moving today to a new place, and so he's not here, and extends his hello to you. And also, Roy served on the strategy committee of the National Association of Japanese Canadians, the organization that negotiated the redress settlement with the Canadian government in 1988, and published 2 books. In Justice in Our Time, the Japanese-Canadian Redress Movement, and Redress Inside the Japanese-Canadian Call for Justice. Roy received the Order of Canada in 2006, became a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada in 2007, and was awarded the Order of British Columbia in 2009. Roy Miki.
Thank you. I'm sorry I have to start with a correction to these autobiographical details. I need to make it known that I am not a member of the Royal Society. The Royal Society announced that I was a member, but I declined the invitation. Given my history and my childhood, anything with royal in it had to be negated in my life. So it's not something I made a fuss over, but it appears in the internet because the Royal Society announced that I had become a member, but I'm not. So that's public information now. I'm sorry to start on that bad note, Daphne. Yeah, I need to douse that. But Daphne, congratulations for a truly luminous work. I'm just astounded looking at it in my PDF form. I haven't looked at the volume itself. But I was reminded of the incredible amount of work you've done in contributing to Canadian writing. I benefited from your work over the years as a professor at SFU, and on numerous occasions we met and talked about your work. And you came to my class, you were so patient with my students, you met with everyone they wanted to talk to you. And my students were always astounded by the level of your engagement with them and the honesty you gave to your work and your contribution to Canadian culture. We've known each other for a long time. We go back to Warren Tallman, and I still remember that seminar you and I were on when Warren organized one of his truly memorable organizational events. And we talked about poetry, and I remember talking with you and thinking what a wonderful poet you were and how blessed I was to meet you. And thinking of Daphne's lifelong engagement with process, and that strikes to the core of my own work and a lot of poets' work on the West Coast. Deep engagement with process poetry, the processual form. She's brought this engagement to processual form to a truly heightened degree of virtuosity that I think is unparalleled in Canadian writing. And thinking of Daphne's lifelong engagement process, some lines came to mind from our old mutual friend, B.P. Nichol, another process fanatic. BP said, "This business of process, nothing more than the moment's grace." From The Grace of the Moment, from the Martyrology, book 6 books. I'm going to read one piece from one of my favorite works, Steveston, the opening section, in which a moment initiates the unfolding of a truly remarkable series of poems. Imagine a town running smoothly, a town running before a fire, canneries burning, Do you see the shadow of charred stilts on cool water? Do you see enigmatic chants standing just under the beam? He said they were playing cards in the Chinese mess hall. He said it was dark. A hall? A shack. They were all crowded together on top of each other. He said somebody accidentally knocked the oil lamp over, off the edge, where stilts are standing. Over the edge of the dike, a river pours, uncalled for, unending. Where chance lurks, fish-like, shadows the underside of pilings, calling up his hall the bodies of men and fish corpse piled on top of each other. Residue, time is, the delta, rot, an endless waste the trucks of production grind to juice, driving through. Smears, blood smears in the dark dirt, this marshland silt no graveyard can exist in, but water swills endlessly out of itself to the mouth, ringed with residue, where chance flicks his tail and swims through.
Our next reader is Rita Wong. Rita, I haven't seen you, but I'm guessing you're there. Okay, good. Rita, as you may know, teaches at Emily Carr in Critical and Cultural Studies Department. Her books, poetry, are Monkey Puzzle, published in 1998. Forage, one of my favorite words, Forage, winner of the 2008 Dorothy Livesey Poetry Prize and Canada Reads Poetry in 2011. Sybil Unrest with Larissa Lai in 2008, Undercurrent in 2015, Perpetual with Cindy Mochizuki, also in 2015, and she's the co-editor, I haven't seen this book yet, but I'm looking forward to it, co-editor with Dorothy Christian of Downstream, Reimagining Water from Wilfrid Laurier Press in 2017. Rita Wong.
Thanks, Colin. It's an honor to be here tonight and to celebrate Daphne's work, such a beautiful book. I wanted to say that my work for the last decade has been to learn with and from water, which is also to learn from and with Daphne Marlatt's work. And it's been a real pleasure over the years to run into Daphne at all sorts of places. And the work in the poems, for me, the energy in those poems ripples out into the world in really beautiful and sometimes surprising ways. One time I ran into Daphne at the joint review panel to stop the Enbridge pipeline, and she spoke very beautifully there. And I see that work as a continuum of what's in the book, and that the words are always moving and flowing through us and into the world. So thank you for all the water protection work. Thank you for the work to hopefully protect the Peace River from the Sightsee Dam that's going on right now, and many other water struggles. I wanted to follow up Roy's beautiful reading with the last poem from the Stevenson section, because I think they, it just is a nice kind of watery moment. All right. Generations at the mouth. Clans of salmon, chinook, coho gathering just offshore. Backbones no longer intact. Steam pressured in millions of cans. Picked clean barbecue leavings in 1,000 garbage bags ripped open by cats, rats. They can't find their way back. What is the body's blueprint? Return what is solid to water, the first peoples said. Returned, every bone intact, generates the giving back of race, kind, kin. Choked in urban outfalls, fished as they aim for rivers, sediment thick with runoff. Tamanus of the wild, they hover, sonar streaks, impossible vision glitches, outside pens where farmed lookalikes grow pale and drugged. Kin, wild skin, wild and electric at the mouth, where rivers disappear in the that is not that. The Chinook can't find their way back. Come out of the blue, this flow, these energy rivers and wheels, radiant giving unlocked. And not this frozen, this canned product eagles once stripped. Eagles, bears, going, gone, hungry. And wild outside, shut doors where light pools, and we pour over stock market news. Refuse our interrelation, refuse to pour back. What is the body's blueprint? Impermanent, shifting energy blocks in its own becoming, a stream and streaming out to the void where rivers lose themselves. In the bardo, as many beings as waves gather at any opening, those in between and not yet ones that race a river of sperm to be here now. Light pour, each cell in its dying turn returns. What is the mouth of the river now? A toxic O of emptiness? Teeming whole of ever becoming we create? Re-entry, return, verbing the noun out of its stuck edges and into occurrence, currents, cur. We've lost the verb in our currency, a frozen exchange, streaming emptiness. They're fishing in London now. At the mouth of the river, clans of the possible are gathering. The Chinook, the Coho, rivering just offshore, are us.
Thanks, Rita. Our next reader is Fred Waugh. I read somewhere that he's written 17 books of poetry, but I believe it's more than that. I hope you all have a copy of his collected earlier poems from last year, Scree, edited by Jeff Dirksen. It's a wonderful volume, just as Daphne's is. And are there some here tonight, or is it only Daphne? Okay, just Daphne tonight, but you can get it from these guys here. So Fred is the author of books, some books I like very, very much: Pictograms of the Interior of BC, Breathe in My Name with a Sigh, Grasp the Sparrow's Tail, I've always loved that, Waiting for Saskatchewan, Music at the Heart of Thinking, Limestone Lakes Utaniki, So Far, for which he won the Stephenson Award for Poetry, Ali Ali Home Free, The Diamond Grill, won the Writers Guild of Alberta Howard O'Hagan Award for Short Fiction, Faking It, Poetics and Hybridity, Critical Writing, 1984 and 1999, wonderful essays on language and writing, won the Gabrielle Roy Prize for Criticism, Sentenced to Light, Talonbooks, 2009, finalist for the 2009 Relit Award for Poetry, Isadore, 2010, won the Dorothy Livesey Prize for Poetry, and Fred was appointed to the Order of Canada in 2012, and he served as Canada's Parliamentary Poet Laureate from 2011 to 2013. And Talon will be publishing a collaboration that Rita and Fred have been working on called Beholden, a Poem as Long as the River. It's part of their project on the Columbia River. And I noticed that George Bowring says, Fred, that you are as innocent as a lynx. And I wonder what he means by that. Fred Waugh.
List. Daphne, congratulations again, and it feels so good to have this in our presence, and as a document to, for me, to probably my soulmate of poetry. I've been working at things for a long time, paying attention to similar kinds of things. anyway, I just want to read this poem and this piece, and I'm sorry it's one of the longer pieces, and but Kit is here tonight, her son Kit, and Kit appears in this poem, and this poem is a piece from. It's actually faces the poem that Susan read, Meant, a lost book. Listen. It's a very important word. In fact, I was telling Rita, I took that word today, not from here, but from another context, and put it at the beginning of my section of the poem, Beholden. And the poem is 114 feet long, and it ends in the word silence. Apparently, they share the same letters. Listen, he was reading to her, standing on the other side of the kitchen counter where she was making salad for supper, tender orange carrot in hand, almost transparent at its tip, slender. And she was wondering where such carrots came from in winter. He was standing in the light reading to her from a book he was holding, her son behind him at the table where amber light streamed from under a glass shade she had bought for its warm color midwinter, though he had called it a cheap imitation of the real thing. In its glow, her son was drawing red Flash and blue Superman into a comic he was making, painstakingly having stapled the pages together, and now with his small indefinite hand trying to draw exact images of DC superstars and Marvel heroes none of them had ever seen except in colored ink. But he was reading to her about loss, excited because someone had named it at last, was naming, even as he read, the shape of what he felt to be his own, recognized at last in words coming through him from the page, coming to her, through his emphatic and stirred voice, stumbling over the rough edges of terms that weren't his, even as he embraced them. Lost, how their dancing had lost touch with the ring dance, which was a collective celebration, he said. She was standing with the grater in one hand, carrot in the other, wondering if the grating sound would disturb him. She wanted to hear what had stirred him. She wanted to continue the movement of making salad, which, in the light and the Lowenbrow they shared, was for once coming so easily, almost with spring stirring around the corner of the house in a rhythm of rain outside she was moving in, had moved, barely knowing it was rain beyond the wetness of walking home. Hand in hand, he was saying, a great circle, like the circle of the seasons. And now people barely touch, where at least with the waltz they used to dance in couples, then with rock apart, but to each other, whereas now he caught her eye. The dances we've been to, you can see people dancing alone, completely alone with the sound. Lifting the carrot to the grater, pressing down, watching flakes of orange fall to the board, she felt accused in some obscure way, wanted to object. It was her generation, after all. Thought up an obscure argument about how quadrilles could be called collective in ballrooms where privileged guests took their assigned places in the dance. But now, and she recalled the New Year's Eve party they'd been to, almost 100 people, strangers come together, and people don't know each other in the city the way they used to in a village, but that only glanced off what the book was saying about husbandry and caring for the soil as a collective endeavor. The whole carrot was shrinking into 1,000 flakes, heaped and scattered at once. The whole carrot, with its almost transparent sides shining in the light, had ground down to a stump, her fingers clutched close to the jagged pockets of tin that scraped them. She saw her fingers, saw blood flying like carrot flakes, wondered why she imagined blood as part of the salad. Listen, he was saying, this is where he's really got it. And he read a long passage about their imprisonment in marriage, all the married ones with that impossible ideal of confining love to one. One cannot love a particular woman unless one loves womankind, he read. Listen, he said, and he read her the passage about the ring dance, about the participation of couples in one great celebration, the amorous feast that joins them to all living things. He means fertility, she said, thinking, oh no, oh back to that, women's one true function. He means the fertility of the earth, he said. He means our lives, aware of seasonal growth and drawing nourishment from that instead of material acquisition and exploitation. Listen, he read a passage about sexual capitalism, about the crazy images of romance that fill people's heads, sexual freedom and skill, and the me generation on all the racks of all the supermarket stores. Using her palms like two halves of a split spoon, she scooped up the heap of carrot flakes and dropped them onto a plate of lettuce, dark because it was romaine torn into pieces in the wooden bowl with other green things. Dance, in and out. She watched the orange flakes glisten in their oil of skin, touch the surfaces of green she tossed with real spoons, each flake dipping into the dark that lay at the heart of what? Their hearts? As they had the other night, sunk into bed, at the end of the party, drunk and floating, their laughter sifting in memory through conversations, wrapped in the warmth of what everyone had said and how they had moved away and toward each other and loved in very obscure ways. Slowly they had made love to everyone they loved and each other, falling through and away from their separate bodies. Listen, she said, as the rain came up, and she set the salad on the wooden table underneath the lamp. Beautiful.
Our next reader was to have been Katrina Strang, and she's not able to be here this evening. She sends congratulations to you. There's a family situation, so she's not here, and wishes she could be. And so then it ends up being me. And I wanted to say that, Daphne, what I always loved about your writing, what I always appreciated about it so much is that in many ways I experience it as three-dimensional. I experience it as language carved in the air, in a sense. And Fred, you just made me think about when you were talking about light, how it's like carving light in the air also. So there's something about language and light becoming one in these three dimensions, in space. I wanted to read the final poem in Vancouver Poems, after brandishing it. And of course I found out that this is slightly different than the one in the original edition. Admirably so, of course. I have a cold, so I'm reading a poem called Cough. Cough comes to reside in my lung, under the steady drip of conifers at night. Slow, glowworm. Rains drive home. Eats earth while night covers, something shines. Lamping. No more than possibility, Lampyridae. Wings hardly. Tell, they're fishing for you under cover of the earth. Small one exposed, whose soft abdomen shines, all feeling there, eyes closed, breathing. Want? Or even know you do, till bread, stone, is in your mouth open, crying. Whether you come or go, to dwell in or shine, night, the conifers are sighing halfway up the sky. Eaves drip, echo, trees' arms shedding water from its wax. Cover you lost. Born into a warm band of light the open window shines. No house can stand for long under incessant rain. The cedar grows, arms out, welcoming. This new light in water means under carboniferous imprint of old fern Echinoidea solaster, we step back in space before the drift and diamond light fail to see you. Call worm, small worm, host of light, borrow a shell. It's a great poem, isn't it? I think it's a wonderful poem. And our next poet is Elee, Kraljii Gardiner. She's the author of a book of poems, Serpentine Loop, published by Anvil Press in 2016, nominated for the 2017 Raymond Souster Award. She's the co-editor with John Asfor of V6A, writing from Vancouver's downtown, bless you, Vancouver's downtown east side, published in 2012, a City of Vancouver Book Award finalist. And she's the founder of Thursday's Writing Collective, and as well as the editor and publisher of 8 of its anthologies. Her chapbook, Trauma Head, which was published in 2017, is a precursor to a second book of poetry by the same name, Trauma Head, which is coming out next spring, which has already been shortlisted for the Croce Award for Innovative Poetry. And she already did a reading with Elee Blythe today at the Belkin Gallery, so we're very lucky to have her here. Elee.
Hi, everyone. It is astounding to receive an introduction from Colin and to be here sharing the microphone with Roy and Susan Holbrook, whose amazing editing has brought this tome out, and with Rita, excuse me, and with Fred. Daphne, this is such a better world now that this book is here. I'm so happy, and honestly can't really explain what it is to be here celebrating this with you. So. I got a demonic email not too many days ago. Daphne had invited me to read, and then this email said, here's the 600-page PDF. Please choose one poem. And it's impossible. It's really impossible. So I just had to go with full instinct, and one of the things I think of when I think of Daphne is Strathcona, and another thing I think of is coastlines and water and language, and so I'm reading the poem Slimy. And Daphne had asked that our poem choices be a surprise. So not only is Slimy a surprise for you tonight, it's a surprise for me, because every time I read it, I have a different poem. The orthography and the punctuation is such a thrill, and it changes every single time I read it. It is like a fish under my thumb. So this is the poem of right now. Slimy. Slimy mackerel sea sky, eyes down, limed public library steps. The gulls mean what they say. The gulls mean what they cry. Old men, how many step to a dead fish smell? How would you like a tail in the eye? Scales, a little bit roomy, but otherwise off the point they go fishing. Under latches of the bridge, rusty, rattling their rods. Tide swirls down deep there. Noon reigns in the street, a white lunch. Blue Hubbard figures hump, endless round the cup, too big to get into. Does it hold anything but rain? Steams on a hot day. The park lunches. Hold my hand in the otherwise steamed up closet where bread wilts. I love you, but don't throw your raincoat over my head. It smells. Wet hair hangs into my cup. Love rains. You will go far somewhere. Where? Matter inserts relation. Peels, heels, float like hulls of hands under the wharf. rats dockside, carrying orchids up, and the port, and the starred on-board lights. Milk-run Amalia ends up on library steps. A cigarette, some soup on a wet day steams up the insides of their eyes. I want to know how gulls keep flying.
Daphne Marlatt. Well, if you didn't know, she was born in Melbourne and spent much of her childhood in Malaysia, coming in 1951 to Canada. She went to UBC and was part of the great sort of poetry movement that occurred there in the early 60s, and where she did her degree. She studied elsewhere. That's all I'm going to say, because there's so much more. She was something that I really appreciated. She was a co-founding editor of 2 literary magazines, Periodics and Tessera. And she also co-edited at different times West Coast Line, Island, Capilano Review, and Tish. And we've already alluded to the early sort of, I think of as oral history works of the Strathcona neighborhood and the Japanese-Canadian fishing community in Steveston, with the 2 books published by, are they both by the Oral History over in Victoria, I think? Steveston Recollected, A Japanese-Canadian History with Maya Koizumi in 1975, and Opening Doors, Vancouver's East End with Carol Itter in 1979. And I just have to say, these were groundbreaking books. I mean, we had, some of us may have read Aikenfield, some of us may have seen books similar to this perhaps from other places. Those sort of national observance volumes, but these really changed the way I think people began to think about where they were living. They were really astonishing, and I loved every word of them. Daphne's books, her early books are, many of them are in the volume. I could name some of them, beginning in 1968, Frames of a Story, Leafs. What Matters was a collection of poems from 1968 and 1970. Vancouver Poems, Our Lives, Steveston, Month of Hungry Ghosts, A Lost Book, Here and There, How Hug a Stone, Touch to My Tongue, Salvage, Small Print. And in this book is the facsimile of the chapbook between brush strokes, which was published in 2008. So most of you probably haven't seen that, but when you get this volume, you'll have a chance to take a look at it. Really marvelous. In 2001, Daphne published This Tremor, Love Is, an album of love poems, and it was a finalist for the 2002 Dorothy Livesey Poetry Prize, 25 years of love poems. In 2006, she was appointed to the Order of Canada in recognition of a lifetime of distinguished service to Canadian culture. Her dramatic work includes The Gull, the first Canadian play staged in the ancient ritualized tradition of the Japanese No Theatre, and that won the Uchimura Neowa Prize in 2008. In 2009, she did win the Dorothy Livesey Prize for Poetry for the extraordinary long poem, The Given. I just want to read a tiny bit of what she says about that, because I think you'll get a sense of her work. A long poem, she says, narrated by disparate voices, a sort of vocal opera. Some of these fragments are grounded in the place where I live, the Strathcona neighborhood of Vancouver's East End, where homelessness and drug traffic meet community art and domesticity, all on the site of the city's original immigrant basin. The poem juxtaposes this current neighborhood of social nonconformity and racial difference, located in the heart of the city, with the suburban social conformity of North Van of the 1950s. The poem sets fragments of telling against one another, so as to hear what happens in the spaces between what is said and what isn't said, how they coexist, how fatal accident can shake up peripheral lives, how early friendship foretells sexual identity, how a death in the family can be both a statement and a mystery. 2012, she received the George Woodcock Lifetime Achievement Award. 2012, that year also, Liquidities was published, which was a revisiting Vancouver poems. Extraordinary Readings Fava in 2016, both from Talonbooks, and of course now Intertidal, so we can go back and look at all these works, and many of which are hard to find. So Daphne, we honor you this evening, and thanks so much. Daphne Marlatt.
Well, this is quite a night. Thank you all so much for coming to help celebrate this remarkable book that Talon has spent, all the people at Talon have spent months putting together with great faith and patience. I have a lot of thanks to give, but first of all, I want to thank my incredible readers tonight. It's so interesting to hear your own voices reflected in my words. It's an astonishing treat. This kind of thing should happen more often. And there were lots of surprises. And thank you, Colin, for emceeing so well and for what you said about my work. Thank you. I love that image of words and like light being carved in the air. My thanks go first of all to Susan Holbrook, my editor, collaborator, who saw the scope of this book as we worked together to define it. And without Susan, it would never have been completed. She and I spent hours talking on the phone, long distance. She came all the way out here in the summer of last year to begin to try and set the parameters for this impossibly large book. And her humor has sustained me through all of this. Susan, you are a joy to work with. My thanks too to Kevin for his grand vision of publishing a series of collected poetries in this time when contemporary poetry has become underrated. This series helps to keep poetry's relevance alive, and I'm honored to follow in the collected footsteps of Phyllis Webb and Fred Waugh. And I'm delighted to hear that Roy will be carrying on that track of footsteps with the next volume. I also want to thank Chloe Filson, who was the project editor and copy editor for her months of hard labor working. We worked with very difficult scans, and she was incredibly patient with all the difficulties we encountered and all my revisions along the way. Chloe, you're an angel. Thank you. I want to thank Esther Rosenberg for permission to reproduce her beautiful and very appropriate photograph on the cover of Intertidal. I've loved Esther's work. She and Richard Tetreault have their studio and their living space just a couple of blocks away from where Bridget and I live, so it's wonderful to have Strathcona work on this book. And my thanks to Robert Minden, Cheryl Sirks, and Francis Hunter for generously allowing us to include a few pages of their art from some of my earlier books, our earlier books. Thanks to Les Smith for very spacious book design and for finding Esther's photograph. Thanks to Donato Mancini and Anne-Marie Metten and Richard Hopkins for working together to provide the most comprehensive bibliography I've ever seen. That was quite a surprise for me, too. And thanks to Spencer Williams, Anne-Marie Metten, Charles Simard, Tamara Lee for proofreading, copy editing, and everything else that has contributed to the making of this book. My deep thanks to Bridget McKenzie, who kept faith in this project when I did not, calmed me, fed me, and generally counseled patience. And finally, deep gratitude to my friends, partners, lovers, and my son, who through the 40 years of this writing have prompted many of the poems in the book. And to the larger community of writers, both living and dead, whose work continues to resonate in much of my own work. So I wanted to read something playful tonight. It seemed like a good thing to do. And I'm going to read from the final, very short series at the end of the book. I need to explain a few things about it first. It's a small series that began in the late 90s when Bridget and I were living in Victoria. And these short prose poems are based on walking meditations. A small group of us would meet once a week in Bridget's living room to meditate, and this would include walking meditation, where you walk focusing simply on the activity of walking, nothing else, supposedly. This sounds simple, but I found it very difficult. The room was small, so our circuit was small. Trying to maintain balance while walking very slowly in a circle, I tend to be a quick walker, was a challenge. So I tried to focus on the physicality of each step, breaking each step down into its parts, and those are the titles of each poem. But as someone engaged with language, I found my mind would skitter off into all sorts of associations, word associations that triggered memories, old song lyrics, others' words, including Gertrude Stein's Rose, Rosary, the past and present interwoven. I think that a rose is a rose is a rose. I think there were roses in the ceramic hearth of the gas fireplace. I think that's what triggered it. Anyway, here they are. Ground, lift, swing. That hip, or hesitate and hover where foot plants itself. A sawdust long jump pitch, North Star's long-legged reach, or long to compete, pulling blinds for movie time. Sinkhole, the blink of burbs over and out. So focus, one foot on rose wool under lashes, limb that stretch for the next rise and swing and set foot, liminal, old hooks, the heel of another swing band sweater set, pearl buttoned, that time, place. So ditch the alarm ringing future shock, infectious, no name place, this or that, backtrack, undo, can do or can't. So focus, for pity's sake on. No swing from an imperial star, no peak Freen's iced pie man circling Simon and his dogs. Walked miles in the monster molecule one-way jam. Only business know-how sets half-baked persona of rapid travel unraveling hole in a sock. Omits, okay, mitts out. Change, got any? Lift, step, drop, this never-ending speak, its inner hook, some flash cognition continuity, leap onto the next, cross-cut, any side street offers, rhyme a glance, solid, chair leg stays, carpet hot under sock by gas fire's 1920 rose, Arise once out of American eyes, no fumble, that neo-rosary a hooker. All toes, slow, unfold, incessant, seesaw glitch, then shift on left. Why, toes rolling, stretch, slow moment, momentum, meaning, oh, that catch, not so close. Scarlet calves in perfect sync, say, a pass, a hand out, rose, rose, the story goes. Old ever saw, once seen, withdraws, so ground the heel, slow, lift and wait to let it go. Lift, step, set, the pace at inchworm-packed momentums, rhyme won't quit. Danny Kaye say Saturday matinee lineup, anticipate capri pants, lycra now, or drawstring loose or ankle, swing step, or roll that looser ball over. Glow, little glowworm, glows a curve that throws you, so rotate a slight wheel, macro now is micro turns. Shimmer, shimmer, wheeling clockwise, each her own procession trailing. Dimmer, dimmer, glow lights banked in fog. This self, this slight twist in knee means lift the endeavor spine, a cowl, habit set by nones, no vespers now, none chimed in the 50s. Oh, bent, ambient, circa white lunch teacup, walkabout repeat, time's drowse, the language douse, and not for keeps. Lift, swing, drop the burden of hip, its rotary move and foot glides, a slight hitch forward, teetering one leg on an old tear. Story here, all filaments radiate, little hooks, think past it. Think rugs, pink ground, toes probe, heel down, sequence means around or lateral slides here, slewing words, ever label, preserves I want to itself or you self. Incontinent meaning seeps external. I seeks the three wee Hubbard figures inch around a cup's interior sign, no longer anyhow restricted entry. Any other can return a welcome for the umpteenth sip in the mind, zipped or unzipped, remains a lateral run through rapid thought, lightnings, my, mine, unhook the foot, nearly swing, drop this holding moment by the by. Step, ground, lift. Eyes steady now and turn, slight angle, not to wobble in this orbit or a bit. It never just repeats. Her spiraling cosmic bodies, Montreal off her rosy round in Paris earlier, accrete sense from the nonce wool gathering footfalls of rooms, mauve underlay in brilliant play. Eyes wedge, pull back on focus now. Opening out, non-locable, non-vocable, at intersections, traffic mind, that bend around us, circling same old habit space. A figure pull makes each definitive in the gloom. Eye strips us back to gender underlay, or what's in store, say, mother in the cupboard, stall on slow, see each particular wrinkle in the common round, not cow or how, inept, this happenstance, step, step, immediate and relative without, because. Thank you all.
Thanks, Daphne. Pretty terrific. We come to the end of the evening. Now time to, I believe, eat cheese and drink wine. I just wanted to pick up on something you said, because I don't know a room that's as full of poetry as this room is historically, for those of us across Canada, actually. And I just wanted to say there are many beloveds who are not with us this evening and who I remember in this room, and I have a feeling they were listening in, so I wanted to salute them as well and to remember them and to say thanks so much. Yeah, thanks, Daphne.